They said she was chasing ghosts. A girl too young, too small, too broken by grief to know when to quit. But on a sweltering August afternoon in Riverside County, when the whole town gathered to watch her fail, Lily Bennett walked into that corral with nothing but a sketchbook and her mother's memory. And she did something no man, no trainer, no so-called expert had ever done. This is the story of a 15-year-old girl and a black stallion who both learned that sometimes the fiercest creatures just need someone brave enough to sit in the dust and wait. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The heat rose in waves off the packed dirt of Harlow's Creek Town Square, turning the air thick enough to taste. It was the kind of Montana summer day where even the cottonwood trees seemed to sag under the weight of the sun, their leaves hanging limp and exhausted. The annual livestock auction always drew a crowd, ranchers and farmers driving in from counties away to bid on breeding stock, equipment, sometimes just to stand in the shade of the auction tent and complain about feed prices and the government. But today the crowd had gathered for a different reason. Word had spread through Riverside County like wildfire through dry grass. Frank Garrison was bringing in the devil horse, the one that had already put 2 trainers in the hospital and sent a third running for the county line swearing he'd never touch another horse as long as he lived. Midnight, they called him, though some used less charitable names. A 4-year-old stallion, black as a moonless night, with eyes that burned like coals and a temperament meaner than a rattlesnake in a coffee can. Lily Bennett stood at the edge of the crowd, pressed against the weathered fence post, trying to make herself invisible. At 15, she had perfected the art of taking up as little space as possible, of moving through the world like a shadow that had learned to walk on its own. She wore her mother's old denim jacket despite the heat, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, the fabric sun-faded and soft from years of wear. Her dark hair hung in a single braid down her back, pieces escaping to stick to her neck in the humidity. In her hands, she clutched a battered sketchbook, its corners bent and pages rippled from being carried everywhere, stuffed into backpacks and jacket pockets, held tight during the sleepless nights that still came too often. The crowd pressed forward as the trailer backed up to the loading chute, the diesel engine growling and spitting black smoke. Men climbed onto the fence rails to get a better view, their boots scraping against the wood, hats tilted back against the glare. Women gathered in clusters beneath what little shade they could find, fanning themselves with auction programs and speaking in low voices that somehow managed to carry across the yard. Frank Garrison stepped down from his truck, boots hitting the ground with authority. He was a big man, not just in size but in presence, the kind who commanded attention simply by existing in a space. His ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, his cattle won ribbons at the state fair, and his opinion carried weight in every decision made in Harlow's Creek from church fundraisers to school board elections. He wore his success like his hat, tilted just so impossible to miss. He walked to the back of the trailer and stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, looking at the crowd with something between amusement and contempt. Then he nodded to his ranch hands, 2 thick-shouldered men who approached the trailer gate with the caution of soldiers entering enemy territory. The sound that came from inside the trailer made the crowd take a collective step back. It was not a whinny or a neigh but something deeper, more primal. A scream that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The trailer rocked on its axles, metal groaning under the assault from within. One of the ranch hands reached for the latch, and the other grabbed a cattle prod, thumb hovering over the trigger. When the gate swung open, midnight exploded into the world like a storm given form. He hit the end of the loading chute at full force, the impact sending vibrations through the ground that Lily could feel through the soles of her worn sneakers. The stallion reared, front hooves slashing at the air, muscles rippling beneath his coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His mane whipped like black flames, eyes rolling white-rimmed and wild. The crowd erupted. Men shouted, women gasped, children scrambled for higher perches on fence rails and truck beds. Someone's hat went flying, knocked loose in the chaos. The ranch hands struggled with the ropes, boots sliding in the dirt as they fought to control 3/4 of a ton of pure rage and terror. Frank Garrison's voice boomed over the commotion, carrying the particular confidence of a man who had never truly failed at anything that mattered to him. 1,200 pounds of pure crazy right there, folks. Bought him off a ranch in Wyoming, thinking I could make something of him. Thought maybe he just needed a firm hand, the right kind of training. He paused, spat into the dirt, and shook his head. I was wrong. This animal is broken in the head. Dangerous. Can't be trained, can't be ridden, can't even be handled without risking life and limb. Midnight screamed again, the sound cutting through the afternoon heat like a blade. He threw himself against the ropes, and for a terrifying moment, Lily thought he might actually break free, might charge into the crowd and hurt someone. But the ranch hands held, barely, their faces red with effort and streaming with sweat. I'm done with him, Garrison continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. I'll give him to anyone fool enough to take him, free of charge. Otherwise, he goes to the slaughterhouse come Monday morning. Can't have an animal like this around. It's a liability, plain and simple. The crowd murmured, a wave of sound that rose and fell like wind through wheat. People shook their heads, exchanged knowing looks, made jokes about how much meat a horse that size would yield. Lily heard someone behind her say it was a shame, that the horse probably had decent bloodlines somewhere back in his past. But what could you do with an animal that refused to be civilized? She had been drawing without realizing it, her hand moving across the page in quick, instinctive strokes. The charcoal caught the curve of Midnight's neck, the arch of his spine as he fought the ropes, the wild desperation in his eyes. But as her hand moved, she began to see something else, something beneath the rage. The way his ears flicked backward and forward, constantly searching. The way his nostrils flared, drinking in every scent of this strange place filled with hostile voices. The way his entire body trembled, not just with fury but with something else. Fear. He was terrified. Everything about him screamed it once you knew how to look. The aggression was armor. The violence a desperate attempt to create distance between himself and a world that had given him nothing but pain. Lily recognized it because she had spent 2 years wearing the same armor, building the same walls, lashing out in smaller, quieter ways at anyone who tried to come close. Her mother had taught her to see like this, to look past the surface of things. Margaret Bennett had been an artist, though she never called herself that, just a woman who liked to draw and paint when the farm work allowed. She had filled sketchbooks with studies of animals, particularly horses, capturing not just their physical forms but something deeper, some essential truth about each creature. Lily had spent countless afternoons sitting beside her mother in fields and barns, learning to really see, to notice the tilt of an ear or the set of a shoulder that told you what an animal was feeling. The sketchbook Lily carried now had been her mother's. The early pages still held Margaret's work, drawings and notes that Lily studied like scripture. Toward the middle, the pages became shared space, mother and daughter's work intermingling. The last third was all Lily's, filled with increasingly desperate attempts to hold onto something that kept slipping away like water through cupped hands. She looked up from the page to find Midnight's eyes locked on hers. In the chaos of the scene, with men shouting and ropes straining and the crowd pressing forward, somehow the stallion had found her in the mass of faces. His ears pricked forward, just for a second, and Lily felt something pass between them, some wordless recognition. Before she could think about what she was doing, before the rational part of her brain could intervene, Lily closed her sketchbook and stepped forward. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, almost lost in the noise, but she forced herself to speak louder. I'll take him. The crowd didn't hear her at first. She was just a slip of a girl, easily overlooked, her voice not trained to command attention. But Tommy Cooper, one of the young stable hands who worked odd jobs around town, had been standing near enough to catch her words. His eyes went wide, and he turned to stare at her like preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had just announced her intention to fly to the moon. Mr. Garrison, Tommy called out, his voice cracking slightly. Sir, I think someone just volunteered. The noise died down like someone had thrown a blanket over it. Heads turned, necks craned, people shifting and jostling to see who could possibly be stupid enough to claim the devil horse. When they saw Lily standing there, sketchbook pressed against her chest like a shield, the reaction was immediate. Laughter. It started as scattered chuckles, a few snorts of disbelief, but it grew and spread like the laughter was its own living thing, feeding on itself, becoming louder and crueler with each passing second. People doubled over, slapped their knees, wiped tears from their eyes. Someone made a joke about sending the coroner instead of a veterinarian. Someone else suggested they clear a spot at the hospital now to save time. Frank Garrison's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally settling on something between amusement and contempt. He pushed his hat back and squinted at Lily like she was something small and curious he had found crawling across his property. "You?" His voice carried across the suddenly quieter crowd. "Bennett's girl? You're gonna take this horse?" Lily's throat felt like she had swallowed sand, dry and tight, but she nodded. Her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the sketchbook, knuckles white with the pressure. She could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers starting up like a swarm of insects, buzzing and persistent. "That's Margaret's daughter," someone said. "Poor thing hasn't been right since her mother passed. David's let her run too wild. Should have sent her to live with relatives in Billings where someone could keep an eye on her. Always was an odd child, too quiet, spent too much time alone." Garrison took a few steps toward her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. When he got close enough, Lily could smell the tobacco on his breath, see the network of broken blood vessels across his nose, the way his eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, assessing and dismissing her in the same glance. "Little girl," he said, and the condescension in his voice was thick enough to choke on. "That animal will kill you. You understand that? Not might, will. He's already hurt men twice your size. Men who actually know what they're doing around horses. What makes you think you can handle him?" Lily met his eyes, and somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had thought died along with her mother, she felt a spark of something fierce and stubborn flare to life. "I didn't say I could handle him," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I said I'll take him." The distinction seemed lost on Garrison, who shook his head and turned back to the crowd as if appealing to them for confirmation of the girl's obvious insanity. "You all hear this? This is what happens when a child loses a parent and doesn't get proper supervision. David," he called out, scanning the crowd. "Where's your father, girl? Someone needs to talk sense into you." But David Bennett wasn't there. He rarely came to town anymore, preferring to stay on the farm where he could work himself to exhaustion and avoid the pitying looks, the careful questions, the reminders of everything he had lost. Lily was on her own, which was nothing new, just more obvious than usual. Tommy Cooper stepped forward, his young face earnest and worried. "Miss Lily, I don't think this is a good idea. That horse, he's not like the ones you've drawn in your book. He's hurt people bad." Lily looked at Tommy, who had always been kind to her, who helped her father with repairs sometimes and never made her feel like she was something broken that needed fixing. "I know," she said simply, "but Mr. Garrison's going to kill him if someone doesn't take him. And I think I might understand him better than most people would." Garrison had heard enough. He threw his hands up in a gesture of theatrical surrender. "Fine, fine. You want him, he's yours. Sign a waiver releasing me from all liability, and you can take the damn beast. But when he throws you and breaks your neck, don't come crying to me." He paused, seemed to realize what he had just said, and added, "Well, you won't be able to, but you know what I mean." More laughter from the crowd, though some of it had taken on an uncomfortable edge now. A few people looked genuinely concerned, mothers pulling their children closer, old-timers shaking their heads and muttering about tragedy waiting to happen. Mrs. Eleanor Price pushed her way through the crowd, her small frame somehow commanding space despite her age. She had been Margaret Bennett's closest friend, the only person in Harlow's Creek who truly understood what the town had lost when cancer took her. She taught English at the high school, or had until her retirement 3 years ago, and she still carried herself with the authority of someone used to commanding the attention of rooms full of restless teenagers. Frank Garrison, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "If you're going to give this girl that horse, you'll do it properly. Get your paperwork, make it legal, and help her load him onto a trailer. And the rest of you?" She turned to sweep the crowd with a look that had silenced countless classroom disruptions. "Might want to remember that this child has more courage in her little finger than most of you have shown in your entire lives." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the laughter dying completely now. Garrison's jaw worked like he was chewing something tough, but he nodded curtly. "Fine. Tommy, go get the paperwork from my truck. Miss Bennett, if you'll follow me, we'll make this official. Then this circus is your problem." As Lily followed Garrison to his truck, legs feeling disconnected from her body, operating on some kind of autopilot she didn't quite trust, she heard the whispers following her like a shadow. "They'll be planning her funeral within a week. Mark my words, that horse will be the death of her. Just like her mother, too stubborn for her own good. David should never have let this happen." She signed the papers without reading them, her signature shaky and uneven. Garrison thrust a lead rope into her hands, the braided leather rough and heavy. "He's yours now. God help you." The ranch hands had managed to get Midnight backed into a borrowed trailer, though the vehicle rocked and shuddered with his movements inside. Every impact sent a metallic boom across the square. Lily approached slowly, sketchbook tucked under one arm, lead rope coiled in her other hand. Tommy appeared at her elbow, his truck keys jangling. "I'll drive you out to your place, Miss Lily. This trailer's too much for you to handle alone, and that horse, well, he's not going to make the trip easy." Lily nodded, grateful beyond words. As Tommy hitched the trailer to his old Ford pickup, she moved closer to the trailer's side. Through the narrow gaps in the metal slats, she could see Midnight's dark form shifting, hear his labored breathing and the occasional violent impact as he threw himself against the walls. She pressed her palm flat against the hot metal and spoke quietly, words meant only for him. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I don't know if I can help you or if this is the stupidest thing I've ever done. But I know what it's like to be so angry and scared that you just want everyone to stay away. And I know what it's like when everyone expects you to be something you're not ready to be yet. So maybe we can figure it out together." Inside the trailer, the crashing stopped. Just for a moment, just long enough for Lily to wonder if somehow, impossibly, he had heard her and understood. Then it started again, but differently now, less frantic, more like testing the boundaries than trying to destroy them. Mrs. Price appeared beside her, placing a weathered hand on Lily's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said softly. Terrified but proud. She always said you had her gift for seeing what others missed. Lily's eyes burned with sudden tears, but she blinked them back. "I hope I'm not wrong about this." "Even if you are," Mrs. Price squeezed her shoulder gently. "At least you tried. That's more than most people can say. Now, you call me if you need anything, you hear? Day or night. And you be careful." Tommy climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Lily took one last look at the crowd still gathered in the square, at Frank Garrison standing with his arms crossed and his expression smug, at the sea of faces that ranged from concerned to curious to cruelly entertained. Then she climbed into the passenger seat, and Tommy carefully eased the truck forward, the trailer creaking and groaning behind them. The drive out to the Bennett farm took 20 minutes on dirt roads that wound through golden wheat fields and past properties that had belonged to the same families for generations. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and honey. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. But with Midnight crashing around in the trailer behind them, with the weight of what she had just done settling over her like a physical thing, Lily couldn't appreciate the beauty. She just stared out the window and wondered what her mother would have done, would have said, would have thought about her daughter claiming a horse that terrified grown men. The Bennett farm appeared ahead, modest and worn compared to spreads like Garrison's ranch. The house needed paint, the barn roof had missing shingles, and the fences leaned at angles that spoke of deferred maintenance and limited resources. But it was home, the only one Lily had ever known, and despite everything, the sight of it eased something tight in her chest. Her father's truck sat in the driveway, which meant he was home, probably in the barn or the back fields. Lily felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. She hadn't exactly thought through how she was going to explain this to him. Tommy pulled the truck around to the barn, backing the trailer up near the old corral that hadn't held livestock in years. He cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, staring straight ahead. "Miss Lily," he said finally, "I got to be honest with you. I'm scared to death to open that trailer. And I work with horses every day." "I know," Lily said. "I'm scared too." They sat in the truck's cab while the sun continued its descent and the temperature finally began to drop from oppressive to merely uncomfortable. Inside the trailer, midnight had gone quiet, which somehow felt more ominous than the crashing had been. The trailer sat silent in the fading light, a metal tomb containing something wild and dangerous. Tommy had left an hour ago, after helping Lily reinforce the old corral fence with whatever spare lumber they could find in the barn. It wasn't much, just enough to create a space slightly more secure than open field, but nowhere near adequate for an animal like Midnight. They both knew it, though neither said it aloud. David Bennett had emerged from the back field as the sun touched the horizon, his work shirt dark with sweat, his face carved with the lines of a man who had aged a decade in 2 years. He had taken one look at the trailer, at his daughter standing beside it with her arms wrapped around herself, and his expression had gone through a rapid progression of emotions that Lily couldn't quite read in the dying light. Surprise, confusion, concern, and finally a kind of weary resignation that suggested he had used up all his capacity for fighting against the universe. He didn't yell. Lily had half expected him to, had braced herself for anger or fear or demands that she return the horse immediately. Instead, he just stood there for a long moment, then asked in a voice rough with exhaustion, "That the horse from Garrison's auction? The one they're calling Untamable?" Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. David rubbed a hand across his face, fingers rasping against stubble he hadn't bothered to shave in days. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he said finally, and Lily couldn't tell if it was meant as approval or lament. She never could walk past something suffering without trying to help it, even when it was foolish to try. He had gone into the house then, and Lily heard the shower running, heard him moving around the kitchen preparing whatever simple meal he would eat alone before retreating to the television or the pile of farm equipment manuals he studied like religious texts. He didn't offer to help with Midnight, but he didn't forbid her from keeping the horse either, and for David Bennett in his current state, that was practically a blessing. Now darkness had settled over the farm like a heavy quilt, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky with a brilliance that still took Lily's breath away when she remembered to look up. The only sounds were crickets singing in the grass, the distant lowing of cattle from a neighboring property, and occasionally, the soft movement of something large and restless inside the trailer. Lily sat on the corral fence, sketchbook open on her lap though it was too dark to draw. She had been sitting there for over an hour, just being present, letting Midnight get accustomed to her proximity without the pressure of the crowd, without the noise and chaos of the auction. Her mother had taught her that patience was the first tool in connecting with any animal, that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply exist nearby without demands or expectations. She thought about the moment in the square when Midnight's eyes had found hers across the crowd. Had she imagined that flicker of recognition? Was she projecting her own desperate need to be understood onto an animal that was simply too damaged to ever trust again? The questions circled in her mind like hawks over a field, and she had no answers, just the stubborn certainty that had made her step forward in the first place. The trailer shifted slightly, and Lily heard Midnight move to the side closest to where she sat. She could smell him now, sweat and hay and something wilder, something that spoke of open spaces and wind through grass. Her fingers itched for charcoal and enough light to draw, but she forced herself to stay still, to just breathe and let him sense that she meant no harm. "I know you're scared," she said quietly into the darkness. "I would be too if I were you. New place, new person, no idea what's going to happen next. Everything probably seems like a threat right now." The words felt inadequate, like trying to bail out a flooding boat with a teaspoon, but they were all she had. She couldn't explain to him in any language he would understand that she had no intention of breaking him, no plan to force him into submission through violence or domination. She barely understood her own intentions, acting more on instinct and grief-driven impulse than any coherent strategy. A coyote called in the distance, its wavering cry echoing across the fields, and Midnight responded with a sound that was part whinny, part scream, full of loneliness and fury. The trailer rocked with the force of his movement, and Lily had to grip the fence rail to keep from sliding off. When he settled again, she started talking, not about him or horses or what she hoped might happen, but about her mother. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse, because she hadn't really talked about Margaret to anyone since the funeral. Her father couldn't bear it, his grief too raw and immediate to examine. Her former friends had been uncomfortable with her sadness, had gradually stopped calling and inviting her places because she reminded them that terrible things could happen to people they knew. Mrs. Price tried, but there was something about talking to adults that made Lily feel like she had to perform her grief in acceptable ways, to show she was coping and healing according to some invisible timeline. But here in the dark, talking to a horse that couldn't judge her or offer platitudes or change the subject when things got too heavy, she found she could speak truths she had kept locked away. "She got sick when I was 13, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Breast cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. They tried everything, chemo and radiation and experimental treatments that made her so sick she couldn't get out of bed for days. But she kept drawing, even when her hands shook so bad she could barely hold the charcoal. She said creating something beautiful was her way of fighting back, of reminding herself that the world still had good things in it." A breeze picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain that might never actually arrive. Lily pulled her mother's jacket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the worn denim like an embrace. "The last thing she drew was a horse," Lily continued. "She was in hospice by then, at home because she refused to die in a hospital. Dad and I took turns sitting with her, and one afternoon when I came into her room, she was working on the sketch. Her hand was so weak the lines were shaky, but you could still tell what it was. A horse running free across a field, mane flying, powerful and wild and completely unburdened." Inside the trailer, Midnight had gone completely still, and Lily wondered if he was listening or if she was simply imposing meaning on the silence because she desperately needed to believe she wasn't alone in this. "She told me something that day." Lily's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through it. "She said that the wildest creatures are often the most wounded, that they fight so hard against connection because they've learned that vulnerability leads to pain. But she also said that those same creatures, if you can reach them, will teach you more about courage and resilience than 1,000 tame ones ever could." A light came on in the farmhouse, her father's bedroom window glowing yellow against the darkness. Lily watched it for a moment, wondering if he was thinking about Margaret too, if he lay awake remembering the way she used to move through their lives like music, making everything seem more vibrant and meaningful just by being present. "I don't know if she meant horses specifically or if she was trying to tell me something about myself," Lily admitted. "But when I saw you today, fighting those ropes like your life depended on it, all I could think was that she would have seen something in you worth saving. And if she would have seen it, then maybe I can learn to see it too." The darkness pressed close, intimate and vast all at once. Lily's eyes had adjusted enough that she could make out the shapes of the barn and the house, the line of fence posts marching away into the gloom, the silhouette of the trailer where Midnight waited. She pulled her sketchbook open, running her fingers over the pages she couldn't see but knew by heart. Her mother's drawings filled the early sections, studies of horses in various poses and expressions, notes in the margins about muscle structure and movement, about the difference between looking at an animal and truly seeing it. Margaret had possessed a gift for capturing not just physical form but essential character, the unique spirit that animated each creature. Lily's own attempts filled the later pages, growing progressively more confident in technique but never quite matching her mother's ability to reveal soul alongside anatomy. She had spent 2 years trying to recapture what Margaret had shown her, to see the way her mother had seen, and mostly failing. But tonight, sitting in the dark beside a horse everyone called a monster, she felt closer to understanding than she had in months. "I'm going to open the trailer tomorrow," she told Midnight. "Not because I think you're ready, but because keeping you locked up isn't fair. There's a corral here, it's not much, but it's bigger than that box. You'll be able to move around, stretch your legs. I won't try to touch you or rope you or any of that. I'll just be nearby, and we'll see what happens." It sounded insane even to her own ears, a plan formed more from desperation and intuition than any real knowledge of horse training. But the conventional approaches had already failed with Midnight, had turned him into something broken and dangerous. Maybe what he needed wasn't someone who knew what they were doing, but someone willing to admit they didn't have all the answers. The temperature continued to drop as the night deepened, the heat of the day finally releasing its hold on the land. Lily climbed down from the fence and approached the trailer slowly, each step deliberate and announced. She could feel Midnight tracking her movement, could sense the tension coiling in him, ready to explode into violence if she gave him reason. She stopped a few feet from the trailer and sat down in the dirt, cross-legged, her back against a fence post. "I'm just going to sit here for a while," she announced softly. "You don't have to do anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore." The absurdity of the situation struck her then, sitting in the dirt talking to a horse that would probably kill her given half a chance, acting on faith and grief and the half-remembered wisdom of a woman who had been dead for 2 years. If anyone from school could see her now, they would have confirmation of what they already suspected, that Lily Bennett had cracked, that losing her mother had broken something essential in her. But maybe broken people were exactly what broken animals needed. Maybe it took someone who understood fear and rage and the desperate desire to lash out at a world that had hurt you to reach something that felt the same way. Lily leaned her head back against the fence post and looked up at the stars, millions of them scattered across the darkness like salt spilled across black velvet. Her mother used to say that starlight was time made visible, that the light she was seeing had traveled for years or centuries or millennia to reach her eyes, making her a witness to the past and present simultaneously. It had seemed like beautiful poetry then. Now it felt like a metaphor for grief, how the people you lost continued to exist in memory, their light reaching you across the unbridgeable distance between life and death. A sound from the trailer pulled her attention back to earth. Midnight was moving again, but differently now, not crashing or fighting, just shifting position. She heard him exhale, a long, heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of every terrible thing that had been done to him. "Yeah," Lily said quietly. "I know. It's exhausting, isn't it? Being angry all the time, keeping everyone at a distance because letting them close hurts too much. I've been doing it for 2 years, and I'm so tired of it. But I don't know how to stop, don't know how to let people in again without feeling like I'm betraying her memory by moving on." The admission surprised her. Words she hadn't quite known she was thinking until they emerged into the night air. She had been holding her grief so tightly, wrapping it around herself like armor, because letting it go felt like losing her mother all over again. If she stopped being the sad girl whose mom died, who would she be? What would be left of Margaret if Lily allowed herself to be happy again? Midnight made another sound, softer this time, almost conversational. Lily smiled despite herself. "You think I'm being ridiculous, don't you? You're probably right. But emotions aren't always logical. Sometimes you just have to feel them until they're done with you." The hours passed with surprising speed, marked by the slow rotation of stars and the gradual shift from deep darkness to the slightly less deep darkness that preceded dawn. Lily dozed intermittently, her head dropping forward and then jerking back up when some sound or movement startled her awake. Each time she woke, she announced her presence again, speaking softly to let Midnight know she was still there, still keeping vigil. As the sky began to lighten in the east, turning from black to charcoal to the deep blue that suggested sunrise was coming, Lily heard her father moving around in the house. The coffee maker gurgled, pipes groaned as he ran water in the kitchen sink. Normal morning sounds from a man trying to maintain routine in the face of loss, going through the motions because stopping would mean having to feel everything he was working so hard to avoid. She stood slowly, muscles stiff from hours of sitting in the dirt, and brushed herself off. Midnight stirred in the trailer, sensing the change in light, the shift from night to day. Lily walked to the barn and gathered supplies, a bucket for water, hay from the dwindling supply in the loft, the lead rope Garrison had given her, though she had no intention of using it yet. When she returned to the corral, her father was standing by the trailer, coffee mug in hand, staring at it like it was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He looked older in the morning light, the silver in his hair more pronounced, the stoop to his shoulders more evident. "Morning," Lily said, and he turned to her with an expression that might have been surprise, as if he had forgotten she existed and was startled to be reminded. "You were out here all night," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Most of it," Lily admitted. "I wanted him to get used to me being around." David took a long drink of his coffee, steam rising from the mug to dissipate in the cool morning air. "Your mother did that once," he said finally, "with a foal that had been rejected by its mother. She slept in the barn for a week, bottle feeding it every few hours, just being present until it learned to trust her." It was the most he had said about Margaret in months, and Lily felt something crack open in her chest, painful and necessary. "Did it work?" she asked, though she thought she remembered the story, a vague childhood memory of a spindly-legged foal that had followed her mother around like a puppy. "Yeah," David said. "It worked. She had a gift for that, for seeing past the surface to what needed healing underneath." He paused, seemed to struggle with something, then added, "You have it too, that gift. I've watched you these past 2 years drawing and observing, and you see things the way she did. It scares me, if I'm honest, because I couldn't protect her and I don't know how to protect you either." Lily's throat tightened with unshed tears. This was more vulnerability than her father had shown since the funeral, more emotion than she had seen from him in the long, hollow months when he had retreated into work and silence. "I don't need protecting, Dad," she said softly. "I need to do this. I need to know if I can help something the way Mom used to help things. I need to matter to something again." David looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes, the understanding that his daughter had been drowning in her own way while he had been drowning in his, both of them too caught up in their individual grief to reach for each other. "Be careful," he said finally. "Please, I can't lose you two." "I will," Lily promised, though they both knew careful had limited meaning when dealing with an animal like Midnight. Her father finished his coffee and headed toward the barn to begin his own daily routine, the endless cycle of feeding and mending and maintaining that kept a farm running even when the people running it were barely holding themselves together. Lily watched him go, feeling the weight of all the conversations they should have had over the past 2 years, all the grief they should have shared instead of bearing separately. Then she turned back to the trailer, to the task she had set herself, to the wild thing waiting in the darkness that might kill her or might, just possibly, teach her how to be whole again. The sun crested the horizon, spilling golden light across the fields, and Lily took a deep breath, steadied herself, and walked toward the trailer door. It was time to see if faith and foolishness were enough to bridge the gap between a broken girl and a horse everyone said couldn't be saved. Her hand touched the latch, metal already warming in the new sunlight, and she felt her mother's presence like a hand on her shoulder, gentle and encouraging. Whatever happened next, at least she would know she tried. At least she would know she had been brave enough to reach toward something wild and wounded, to offer connection even when rejection seemed certain. The latch clicked open, loud in the morning quiet, and Midnight shifted inside, sensing freedom was near. Lily pulled the door wide, stepping back to give him space, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a black nose appeared at the opening, nostrils flaring, testing the air, followed by a head, magnificent and terrifying, eyes rolling to take in this new environment, ears pinned flat against his skull in warning. And finally, the full massive form of him, stepping into the light like a storm made flesh, powerful and unpredictable and absolutely, undeniably beautiful. Lily stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as Midnight emerged fully from the trailer and took his first steps into the corral. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the fence, the barn, the house, and finally her, standing small and vulnerable in her mother's worn jacket, armed with nothing but charcoal and hope. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Lily saw again what she had seen in the town square. The fear beneath the fury, the desperate desire to be understood hiding under layers of defensive aggression. She saw a creature that had been failed by every human who had claimed to know what was best for him, who had learned that trust was a weakness that led only to pain. "I see you," she whispered, and though she couldn't know if he understood the words, she hoped he might understand the intention behind them. "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." Midnight stamped once, a thunderous impact that sent vibrations through the ground, then tossed his magnificent head and screamed defiance at the rising sun. The sound echoed across the Bennett farm and out into the fields beyond, a declaration of rage and pain and stubborn survival that made the morning birds fall silent. And Lily, standing in the shadow of something untamable, felt her mother's gift stirring in her blood, the ability to see past surfaces to the truth underneath, the courage to reach toward healing even when the outcome was uncertain. She didn't know if she could save this horse, didn't know if salvation was even what he needed, but she knew she would try, would show up day after day, armed with patience and presence and the desperate hope that broken things could learn to be whole again. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning cool, and the farm woke fully around them. Her father emerged from the barn and stood watching from a distance, coffee mug forgotten in his hand. Mrs. Price's car appeared at the end of the long driveway, the elderly woman having clearly decided to check on Lily first thing, unable to sleep for worrying. Even a few curious neighbors slowed their trucks on the road, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the devil horse and the foolish girl who thought she could change him. But Lily barely noticed the audience. Her entire focus had narrowed to the magnificent black stallion pacing the perimeter of the corral, testing the fence, learning the boundaries of his new prison. Because that's what it was to him right now, she knew. Just another cage, another place where humans would try to break him into something manageable and useful. She would have to show him differently, would have to prove through action, not words, that this place could be different, that she could be different from everyone who had hurt him before. It would take time, patience, countless small moments of connection building into something that might eventually resemble trust. The sun continued its climb, indifferent to the drama playing out in the small corral on the Bennett farm, indifferent to the hopes and fears of one grieving girl and one damaged horse. The day stretched ahead, full of possibility and danger in equal measure, and Lily settled onto the fence rail with her sketchbook, preparing to do the thing her mother had taught her best. To watch, to wait, to see what others missed, and to believe, against all evidence and reason, that sometimes the wildest, most broken things were exactly the ones most worth saving. The heat rose early that first morning, turning the corral into a furnace before 9 o'clock. Lily had positioned herself on an overturned milk crate near the barn, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid triggering Midnight's defensive instincts. Her sketchbook lay open across her knees, charcoal leaving dark smudges on her fingers as she worked to capture the way light moved across his coat, the tension in every muscle, the constant vigilance in his eyes that never quite settled on anything for long. Midnight had spent the first hour after his release testing every inch of the fence, pushing against posts with his shoulder, scraping along the rails as if searching for weakness. When he found none that would yield to his weight, he had moved to the center of the space and simply stood there, sides heaving, sweat darkening his neck despite the relatively cool morning air. It wasn't exertion that made him sweat. It was fear dressed up as fury, anxiety manifesting as aggression. Lily understood the disguise better than most. She had spent the last 2 years perfecting her own version, wearing silence and withdrawal like armor, keeping everyone at arm's length because letting them close meant risking more loss. Her teachers at school had learned to stop calling on her in class unless absolutely necessary. Her former friends had given up trying to include her in their activities after months of polite refusals. Even Mrs. Price, with all her gentle persistence, had learned there were walls Lily wouldn't let anyone breach. But walls were exhausting to maintain. Lily was discovering that truth as she sat in the growing heat, watching Midnight pace and spin and paw at the ground in patterns that spoke of trauma rather than simple high spirits. He was working so hard to keep her out, to maintain the defensive perimeter that had kept him alive through whatever horrors had shaped him. She could see the effort it took, the way it consumed energy he needed for healing, for rest, for anything resembling peace. Her charcoal moved across the paper in swift, decisive strokes, capturing not just his physical form but something of his inner state. Her mother had taught her to draw what she felt as much as what she saw, to let intuition guide her hand toward truth. The horse taking shape on her page was magnificent and terrifying, powerful muscles coiled tight, eyes wild with something that looked almost like desperation. "You're going to wear yourself out," she said softly, not expecting response, just offering her voice as something steady in his chaotic world. "All that fighting takes energy you don't have to spare." Midnight's ears flicked toward her voice, but his pacing didn't slow. He had carved a path around the corral's perimeter, his hooves churning the packed earth into loose dust that rose in clouds with each impact. Round and round he went, a prisoner checking the walls of his cell, unable or unwilling to accept that perhaps this cage might be different from the others. David appeared from the barn carrying a bucket of water, condensation already forming on the metal sides. He set it near the gate and retreated without a word, though Lily saw him glance at her, some question in his eyes that he didn't know how to voice. She nodded to acknowledge his presence, and he returned the gesture before disappearing back into the barn's shadows where he seemed to spend most of his time now, surrounded by tools and projects that didn't require emotional availability. The water sat untouched. Midnight would approach it occasionally, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent, but he wouldn't drink. Some part of him still believed it was a trap, that the moment he lowered his guard to satisfy his thirst, pain would come. Lily recognized the logic. She had operated under similar assumptions for months, turning down invitations and opportunities because accepting them felt like admitting life could be good again, and admitting that felt like betraying her mother's memory. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 90 degrees. Lily had moved her milk crate into the narrow slice of shade provided by the barn's overhang, but it offered only marginal relief. Sweat plastered her shirt to her back and made the pages of her sketchbook damp and rippled. She had filled 5 pages with studies of Midnight, each one capturing a different aspect of his distress. The flattened ears, the bared teeth, the way he held his head high and tight, ready to strike at threats both real and imagined. Midnight had finally stopped pacing, standing now in the full sun despite the heat, sides heaving with each breath. Foam had formed at the corners of his mouth, and his coat was dark with sweat. He needed water desperately but still wouldn't approach the bucket. Lily felt a spike of concern sharp enough to make her close her sketchbook and stand. She walked slowly to the gate, moving with deliberate calm, telegraphing her intentions through body language since words meant nothing to him yet. Midnight tracked her movement, head swinging to follow her progress, muscles tensing in preparation for flight or fight. When she reached the water bucket, she picked it up with both hands, the metal handle biting into her palms, and walked it to the fence rail farthest from where he stood. "I'm not trying to trap you," she said, setting the bucket down and stepping back immediately. "I'm just moving it to where you might feel safer taking a drink. No tricks, no expectations. Just water when you're ready for it." She returned to her spot by the barn and settled back onto the milk crate, picking up her sketchbook again but not actually drawing, just watching. Midnight stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, the only movement the rise and fall of his ribs and the occasional flick of his tail against flies. Then, with agonizing slowness, he began to move toward the relocated water bucket. He approached sideways, never taking his eyes off Lily, ready to bolt if she moved. 3 steps forward, then a pause to assess. 3 more steps, another pause. It took him nearly 10 minutes to cross the 20 feet between his position and the bucket, and even when he reached it, he didn't drink immediately. He stretched his neck out as far as it would go, nostrils flaring to catch any scent of danger, eyes rolling to keep both Lily and the bucket in view simultaneously. When he finally lowered his muzzle to the water, Lily held her breath. The first swallow seemed to break something in him, and suddenly he was drinking in great desperate gulps, sucking down the water like a creature that had been dying of thirst, which perhaps he had been. He emptied the bucket in less than a minute, then raised his head, water dripping from his muzzle, and looked directly at Lily. For just a moment, the defensive aggression dropped away completely, and she saw naked vulnerability in his eyes. He had accepted something from her, had allowed himself to take what she offered, and now he was waiting to see what price she would demand in return. Because in his experience, everything came with a price. Kindness was just bait to lower your guard before the real cruelty began. "That's all," Lily said softly. "No catch, no demands. You were thirsty, and now you're less thirsty. That's the whole transaction." She could see him struggling to process this, to reconcile her behavior with his learned understanding of how humans operated. He tossed his head, stamped once, then retreated to the far corner of the corral, as far from her as the space allowed. But he didn't resume his frantic pacing. Instead, he stood facing her, watching, waiting to see what she would do next. Lily opened her sketchbook and went back to drawing, letting the silence stretch between them, letting him see that she had meant what she said. She asked nothing more from him than his presence, offered nothing more than hers in return. It wasn't much, this small exchange of water for trust, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a tiny opening through which connection might eventually flow. The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Lily's father brought her lunch, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a thermos of lukewarm lemonade, but she barely touched it. Her attention remained fixed on Midnight, cataloging his every movement, every shift in posture or expression, building a vocabulary of his body language that might eventually allow them to communicate. She noticed that his left ear had a small notch missing from the tip, an old injury that had healed crookedly. She saw scars on his shoulders and flanks, thin white lines visible when the light hit at certain angles, evidence of ropes or whips or other tools used to force compliance. His hooves were overgrown and cracked, suggesting months of neglect, and when he moved, there was a slight hitch in his gait on the right side that spoke of pain he had learned to compensate for, but couldn't completely hide. Each observation went into her mental catalog, pieces of a puzzle she was trying to solve. What had happened to this horse to make him so afraid? What series of betrayals and cruelties had taught him that humans were the enemy? She would probably never know the full story, but the evidence written on his body told her enough. He had suffered, and he had learned to protect himself the only way he knew how, through violence and intimidation and absolute refusal to submit. Around 4 in the afternoon, Mrs. Price's ancient sedan rattled up the driveway, announcing her arrival with a symphony of squeaks and knocks that suggested the vehicle was held together more by faith than mechanics. She parked in the shade of the cottonwood tree near the house and emerged carrying a covered dish that steamed in the heat. "Brought you some supper," she called, making her way toward the barn with the careful steps of someone whose joints protested unnecessary movement. "Figured you'd be too focused on that horse to remember to feed yourself, and your father's not exactly reliable in the kitchen these days." Lily climbed down from her perch to meet her, grateful for the interruption even though she hadn't realized how stiff she had gotten from hours of sitting. Mrs. Price studied her with the penetrating gaze that had once kept entire classrooms in line, taking in the sweat-stained shirt, the charcoal smudges, the intensity in Lily's eyes that spoke of total focus. "How's it going?" Mrs. Price asked, setting the dish down on an old table outside the barn. "He drank some water," Lily said, and heard the triumph in her own voice. How pathetic it might sound to someone who didn't understand how significant that small act of trust had been. But Mrs. Price just nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's good. That's a start. Your mother always said the first step in healing was accepting that you needed help, even if it was just accepting a drink of water from someone who wanted to offer it." The mention of Margaret sent a familiar ache through Lily's chest, but it was less sharp than it had been, tempered somehow by the purposeful exhaustion of the day. "Did she really say that? Or are you just trying to make me feel better?" Mrs. Price smiled, the expression transforming her stern features into something warmer. "She really said it. We had a long talk after her diagnosis, when she was trying to decide whether to fight it or just let it take her. She was so stubborn about accepting help at first, wanted to handle everything herself, didn't want to be a burden. But eventually she realized that letting people care for her wasn't weakness. It was courage. Takes more strength to be vulnerable than to pretend you don't need anyone." Lily looked back at Midnight, who was watching this exchange with wary attention. "I don't think I know how to be vulnerable anymore." I've spent so long keeping everything locked down tight that I'm not sure I could open up even if I wanted to." "You opened up enough to take in that horse?" Mrs. Price pointed out. "That took vulnerability, admitting you cared about something enough to risk getting hurt by it. Most people won't do that, won't let themselves feel deeply because feeling deeply means you can be wounded deeply. But your mother understood that the wound is worth it if it comes from caring about something real." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching midnight watch them, this strange dance of observation and caution playing out in the heat-shimmered air. Then Mrs. Price squeezed Lily's shoulder and headed back to her car, calling over her shoulder that the dish was chicken and dumplings, and Lily should eat it while it was still warm. Lily uncovered the dish, and the smell that rose from it was so achingly familiar, so perfectly reminiscent of dinners at her mother's table before sickness and death had rearranged their lives, that she had to blink hard against sudden tears. She carried it to her milk crate and ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing but not wanting to waste Mrs. Price's kindness. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Midnight finally began to show signs of genuine fatigue. His head dropped slightly, the tension in his body easing from coiled spring to merely vigilant. He had stopped tracking Lily's every movement, no longer regarding her as an immediate threat, though he clearly wasn't ready to trust her either. Lily set aside the empty dish and picked up her sketchbook again. But instead of drawing, she simply held it, running her fingers over the cover that her mother's hands had touched countless times. The journal was filling up fast, pages upon pages of horses and studies and attempts to capture something essential about the way animals moved through the world. Soon she would need a new one, and the thought brought a pang of loss. This sketchbook was the last physical connection to her mother's artistic practice, the last pages that bore Margaret's fingerprints and smudges. "She would have liked you," Lily said to Midnight, her voice carrying across the corral in the evening quiet. "Not because you're beautiful or powerful or any of those obvious things, but because you're honest. You don't pretend to be anything other than what you are. You're scared and angry, and you wear it right out where everyone can see it." She always appreciated honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Midnight's ears swiveled toward her voice, and he took 2 steps closer before seeming to catch himself and stopping. Lily felt her heart rate pick up at even that small gesture. He was listening, not just hearing sounds but actually listening to her, processing her words even if he couldn't understand their literal meaning. She thought about what Mrs. Price had said, about vulnerability being courage, about the strength it took to admit you needed help. Her mother had fought her cancer with everything she had, accepting treatments that made her violently ill, letting friends and neighbors bring meals and clean the house and help with the farm work. Lily had watched her mother's pride take beating after beating as she lost her independence, her dignity, her basic ability to care for herself. But Margaret had never lost her core strength, the essential quality that made her who she was. If anything, she had become more herself in those final months, stripped of pretense and social niceties, relating to people with a raw honesty that was sometimes startling but always genuine. She had told Lily things no mother probably should tell a 13-year-old daughter, about her fears and regrets, about the things she wished she had done differently, about how desperately she wanted to live but how tired she was of the endless suffering. Those conversations had been agonizing at the time, too heavy for Lily's young shoulders to bear. But now, 2 years later, she found herself returning to them in her mind, mining them for wisdom she hadn't been old enough to fully understand when they were first offered. Her mother had been trying to teach her something in those final months, some essential lesson about how to live in the face of loss, how to remain open and vulnerable even when every instinct screamed to close down and protect yourself. The light continued to fade, shadows lengthening across the corral, and Lily made a decision. She stood up, set her sketchbook carefully on the milk crate, and walked to the gate. Midnight tensed immediately, his head coming up, his body coiling in preparation for whatever threat she represented. But Lily didn't enter the corral. Instead, she simply opened the gate, pulling it wide and latching it against the fence to hold it open. Then she walked back to her spot by the barn and sat down, saying nothing, offering no explanation. Midnight stared at the open gate, then at her, then back at the gate. His confusion was almost comical, ears swiveling forward and back as he tried to understand what trap she had set this time. "It's not a trick," Lily said quietly. "You want to leave, you can leave. I won't stop you. I'm not going to force you to stay somewhere you don't want to be. But if you do leave, if you run off into those fields and disappear, someone else will find you eventually. And whoever finds you probably won't be as patient as I'm trying to be. They'll rope you and trailer you and either break you or kill you. So you have a choice. Stay here and see if maybe, just maybe, this can be different from what you've known before. Or run and take your chances with whatever comes next." It was a gamble, and Lily knew it. If he bolted through that gate, she might never see him again. Her father would be furious at having to explain to Garrison how she had lost the horse within 24 hours of taking possession. The entire town would have confirmation that she was foolish and incompetent, that giving her that horse had been a mistake from the start. But keeping him trapped felt wrong. He needed to know he had agency, that he could make choices about his own life, that she wasn't just another human who would force her will on him regardless of what he wanted or needed. Trust couldn't be built on coercion. It had to be offered freely and accepted freely, or it was just another form of violence. Midnight walked toward the open gate, each step measured and cautious. When he reached it, he stopped and stood with his head extending through the opening, tasting freedom, smelling the fields beyond. Lily held her breath, her fingernails digging into her palms with tension. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to close the gate, to secure him while she still could, but she forced herself to remain motionless. For a long moment, Midnight stood in that threshold, caught between the safety of boundaries and the terror of the unknown. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled his head back inside the corral. He turned to face Lily, and she could swear there was a question in his eyes, some wordless inquiry about whether this impossible thing was real, whether a human really could offer freedom with no strings attached. "Your choice," Lily said, her voice shaking slightly. "Always your choice. I'll close the gate at full dark to keep predators out, but until then, you decide where you want to be." She watched as Midnight moved away from the gate, walking not toward the open fields and freedom, but deeper into the corral, toward the water bucket her father had refilled while she was talking with Mrs. Price. He drank again, less frantically this time, then raised his head and released a sound that was neither a whinny nor a snort, but something in between, something that almost sounded like a question. "I don't know either," Lily answered, interpreting the sound according to her own need to find meaning in it. "I don't know if this will work, if we can help each other, or if we're both too broken to be fixed. But I know I have to try because trying feels better than giving up, and I've spent too long giving up on things that mattered." The last light drained from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening blue overhead. Lily stood and walked to the gate, pulling it closed with a gentle click of the latch. Midnight watched but didn't react, having made his choice to stay, at least for tonight. Tomorrow might be different. Tomorrow he might change his mind and fight to escape. But tonight, in this moment, he had chosen to remain. Lily returned to the barn and gathered an armload of hay, scattering it near the fence where Midnight could reach it easily. He approached as soon as she moved away, hunger finally overriding caution now that he had decided, consciously or not, that she might not be an immediate threat. She watched him eat in the gathering darkness, the rhythmic sound of his teeth tearing at the hay oddly soothing. Her father appeared from the house, a silhouette against the lit kitchen window. He walked toward the barn with the slow gait of exhaustion, carrying 2 bottles of water, one of which he handed to Lily without comment. They stood together in the darkness, father and daughter, watching the horse that had somehow become a bridge between them, a safe topic of focus that didn't require them to examine their own relationship or shared grief. He stayed, David, observed, and there was something in his voice that might have been approval or might have been surprise. "He stayed," Lily confirmed. "I gave him a choice, and he stayed." "That's more than anyone else gave him," David said. "Choice, I mean, Garrison and those trainers, they tried to force him into submission. Didn't work, obviously. Maybe your way will be different." It was the closest thing to encouragement her father had offered in months, and Lily felt something warm unfurl in her chest. They stood in companionable silence for a while longer. Then David squeezed her shoulder briefly and headed back to the house, leaving Lily alone with midnight and the stars. She remained by the corral until full darkness had fallen and the temperature had finally dropped to something almost comfortable. Midnight had finished the hay and was standing near the center of the space, hip cocked in a posture that suggested relaxation, or at least less acute vigilance. His eyes caught the light from the house and glowed softly, 2 points of reflected warmth in the darkness. "Good night," Lily said softly. "I'll be back in the morning. We'll figure out what comes next together." She walked to the house feeling lighter than she had in months, as if the simple act of getting through this first day, of making it to nightfall with everyone intact and nothing catastrophically wrong, was its own kind of victory. Her mother's jacket still smelled faintly of the perfume Margaret had worn, some floral scent that Lily couldn't name but would recognize anywhere. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders and looked up at the stars, the same stars her mother had looked at, the same stars that would keep shining long after everyone currently alive had turned to dust. Time made visible, her mother had said, the past and present existing simultaneously, separated by distance that could be measured in miles and years and the unbridgeable gap between life and death. But standing here, wearing her mother's jacket, having spent the day acting on principles Margaret had taught her, Lily felt closer to her mother than she had since the funeral. Not in a sad, longing way, but in a way that suggested connection could transcend physical presence, that love could continue to shape the world even after the person who embodied it was gone. She went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, a small space under the eaves that still held all her childhood belongings, stuffed animals and books and artwork covering every surface. She set her sketchbook on the desk and flipped through the day's drawings, seeing in them a progression she hadn't noticed while creating them. The first sketches showed midnight as almost demonic, all rage and violence and threat. But the later ones had captured something else, a vulnerability beginning to show through the defensive armor, a suggestion that beneath the monster everyone saw was just a frightened animal that had learned fear was safer than trust. She wondered if her own progression over the past 2 years would look similar if someone had been documenting it. Starting with the raw, jagged grief of the first months after her mother's death, gradually calcifying into the numb withdrawal she had perfected, and now, perhaps, beginning to crack open again, letting light in through the fissures. It was painful, this opening, this choosing to feel again after so long spent choosing numbness. But it was also, unexpectedly, a relief, like finally setting down a heavy load she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Lily changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the corral, to midnight standing at that open gate with the whole world spread out before him, choosing to stay. Choosing her, or at least choosing not to run from her. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the tiny seed from which trust might eventually grow, given enough time and patience and care. She thought about her mother's fight against cancer, how Margaret had tried every treatment, endured every side effect, clung to life with desperate determination, even when the doctors gently suggested it might be time to consider hospice care. Her mother had been so brave, so unwilling to surrender, fighting until her body simply couldn't fight anymore. Lily had inherited that stubbornness, that refusal to give up even when logic suggested surrender was the wiser choice. But she had also inherited her mother's gentleness, the ability to sit with suffering without trying to fix it immediately, to offer presence and patience as their own form of healing. Those qualities had been buried under Lily's grief, hidden behind walls of self-protection, but she felt them stirring now, awakened by a horse that needed exactly what she had to offer. As sleep finally pulled her under, Lily's last conscious thought was a prayer of sorts, not directed at any god but at the universe itself, at the mysterious forces that brought wounded creatures together and gave them the chance to heal each other. Let this work, she thought. Let me be enough. Let us both be enough for each other. Outside, in the corral under the vast Montana sky, Midnight stood in the darkness with his eyes half closed, finally allowing himself to rest, to lower his guard just enough to drift toward sleep. The girl had been different from the others. He didn't understand why or how, couldn't process it in ways humans would recognize as thought, but some instinct deeper than language told him that perhaps, just perhaps this time might be different. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the fragile thread connecting them. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Midnight slept without nightmares, without starting awake every few minutes to check for threats. The girl had given him a choice, and he had chosen to stay. What that might mean, neither of them yet knew, but it was a beginning, and beginnings were their own kind of magic, full of possibility and hope and the promise that broken things could someday be whole again. Dawn arrived with a coolness that wouldn't last past 8 in the morning, dew clinging to the grass in silver drops that caught the early light like scattered diamonds. Lily woke before her alarm, pulled from sleep by dreams she couldn't quite remember, but that left her feeling restless and purposeful. She dressed quickly in clothes that were already stained and worn. No point in ruining anything decent for work that would inevitably involve dirt and sweat and possibly worse. The house was silent as she moved through it, her father still asleep or pretending to be. Avoiding the awkwardness of morning conversation, neither of them knew how to navigate. She grabbed a piece of toast and an apple from the kitchen, eating standing up while staring out the window toward the corral where she could just make out Midnight's dark shape against the lighter fence rails. He was already awake, standing alert and watchful, his attention fixed on the house as if he had been waiting for her to appear. The moment she stepped onto the porch, his ears pricked forward, tracking her movement with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. This was the dynamic they would have to navigate, this constant observation and assessment, both of them trying to read the other's intentions before making any move. Lily walked to the barn and filled a bucket with fresh water, then gathered another armload of hay. The morning routine had a meditative quality. Simple tasks that required just enough attention to keep her grounded, but not so much that she couldn't let her mind wander. She thought about what came next, about the fact that simply getting Midnight to accept food and water wasn't enough. Eventually she would need to approach him, to touch him, to begin the actual work of gentling a horse that had proven himself ungentleable. The prospect terrified her. She had no formal training in horse handling, no techniques passed down from expert trainers who knew the proper methods for dealing with traumatized animals. Everything she knew came from watching her mother work with horses on neighboring farms, from reading books checked out of the tiny Harlow's Creek library, from instinct and observation and a desperate hope that caring enough might somehow be sufficient. She scattered the hay and set the water bucket in the same spot as yesterday, then retreated to her milk crate with her sketchbook. Midnight approached the offerings more quickly this morning, the hesitation from yesterday already diminishing slightly. He ate with one eye always on her, ready to bolt if she made any sudden movements, but he ate, and that felt like progress. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dew and beginning its daily transformation of the landscape from cool and comfortable to hot and oppressive. Lily had brought a thermos of water this time, learning from yesterday's dehydration, and she sipped from it while her charcoal moved across fresh pages, capturing Midnight from different angles, building a visual library of his moods and postures. Around mid-morning, Tommy Cooper's truck rattled up the driveway, the young man emerging with his characteristic awkward energy, all long limbs and earnest concern. He had the kind of face that couldn't hide what he was thinking, emotions playing across his features like clouds across the sky, and right now what he was thinking was clear worry mixed with curiosity. "Miss Lily," he called, keeping his distance from the corral, respecting the space she had created. "Thought I'd check on you. Make sure you made it through the night okay." Lily set aside her sketchbook and walked over to meet him, grateful for the interruption even though part of her resented the distraction from her observation of Midnight. "We're both still here," she said, gesturing toward the horse. "That's something, I guess." Tommy squinted at Midnight, taking in the way the stallion had positioned himself to keep both humans in view, the tension still evident in every line of his body. "He looks a little less crazy than he did at the auction," Tommy observed. "Still looks like he'd kill you soon as look at you, but maybe a little less enthusiastic about it." The assessment was harsh but probably accurate. Lily found herself smiling despite the grim description. Progress is progress, even when it's measured in degrees of murderous intent. "What's your plan?" Tommy asked, and the question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Because Lily didn't have a plan. Not really. just a vague sense that patience and presence might eventually yield results. "I'm going to try approaching him today," she heard herself say, the decision forming even as she spoke it. Just walking into the corral, not trying to touch him or anything, just being in his space and letting him get used to me being close. Tommy's eyes went wide. "Miss Lily, I don't think that's a good idea. That horse could kill you. I mean actually kill you, not just hurt you. One kick from those back legs and you'd be done." "I know," Lily said, and she did know, had spent half the night cataloging all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. "But I can't help him from outside the fence. Eventually I have to go in there, and it's not going to get any safer by waiting." "At least let me stay," Tommy pleaded. "Let me be here in case something goes wrong, so I can call for help or pull you out or something." Lily wanted to refuse, wanted to keep this private and personal, just her and Midnight working through their shared trauma without an audience. But the practical part of her brain recognized the wisdom in having someone nearby, someone who could summon medical help if the worst happened. She nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but you stay outside the fence and you stay quiet. I need him focused on me, not distracted by worrying about multiple threats." Tommy agreed immediately, clearly relieved to have won even this small concession. He positioned himself near the barn, far enough from the corral to avoid triggering Midnight's defensive instincts but close enough to intervene if necessary. Lily took a deep breath, set her sketchbook carefully on the milk crate, and walked to the gate. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the latch, adrenaline already flooding her system in anticipation of danger. The gate swung open with a creak that seemed loud in the morning quiet, and Midnight's head came up sharply, his entire body going rigid with attention. Lily stepped through the opening and closed the gate behind her, latching it carefully. No escape now for either of them. She stood just inside the corral, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible, arms loose at her sides, gaze lowered to avoid direct eye contact that might be read as challenge. Midnight backed up several steps, nostrils flaring, ears pinned flat against his skull. A low rumble came from his chest, not quite a whinny, more like a warning growl if horses could growl. "It's okay," Lily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to stand here for a while, that's all. You don't have to do anything, don't have to come near me or accept me. Just let me share this space with you." She counted her heartbeats, feeling them hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. 10 beats, 20, 50. Midnight didn't charge, didn't attack, just stood at the far end of the corral watching her with eyes that burned with suspicion and something that might have been fear. Lily took one small step to the side, angling away from him, showing through body language that she wasn't approaching, wasn't threatening. The movement triggered something in Midnight. He exploded into motion, racing around the perimeter of the corral at full speed, kicking up clouds of dust that obscured him momentarily before he burst through them like a storm given form. Lily's every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of the corral before those hooves connected with her body. But she forced herself to stand perfectly still, to become a statue, to offer no threat and no retreat. Midnight completed 3 circuits of the corral at that furious pace, then slowed, sides heaving, sweat already darkening his neck. He stopped at the opposite end from Lily and pawed at the ground, a gesture that could have been threat display or nervous energy, impossible to tell which. Lily remained motionless, counting breaths now instead of heartbeats, using the rhythm to keep herself calm. From outside the fence, Tommy's voice carried across the space, tight with worry. "Miss Lily, maybe you should come out now. He's too worked up." But Lily shook her head minutely, not taking her eyes off Midnight. "Not yet," she called back, keeping her voice steady. "He's just scared. He needs to see that I'm not going to chase him or corner him." She stood there as the sun climbed higher and the heat built, sweat running down her spine and stinging her eyes, muscles beginning to cramp from holding so still. Midnight gradually settled, his breathing slowing, the wildness in his eyes dimming to mere vigilance. He watched her with the intensity of a creature trying to solve a puzzle, trying to fit her behavior into patterns he recognized and failing. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Lily took another small step, this time forward rather than sideways. Midnight tensed but didn't bolt, didn't charge, just tracked her movement with those dark eyes. She took another step, then another, moving with glacial slowness toward the center of the corral. Not approaching Midnight directly, just claiming a bit more of the shared space, testing boundaries. When she reached the center, she stopped and lowered herself to the ground, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. The position was vulnerable in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness of danger, but it also made her smaller, less threatening, more like something to be curious about than afraid of. Midnight's ears swiveled forward, confusion evident in his posture. Whatever he had expected from her, it wasn't this. Lily sat in the dust and the heat, making no demands, offering no rewards, just being present. Her mother had once told her that the most powerful gift you could give another being was your attention without expectation, your presence without agenda. At the time, Lily had been too young to fully understand. But now, sitting in the dirt while a traumatized horse decided whether to kill her or ignore her, she thought she was beginning to grasp what Margaret had meant. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made it impossible to track. The sun wheeled overhead, shadows shifting and shortening. Tommy remained at his post outside the fence, occasionally shifting his weight or taking a drink from his water bottle, but mostly just watching with the same intense focus Lily was applying to Midnight. Her legs went numb from sitting, then progressed through pins and needles to a kind of distant ache she could acknowledge without really feeling. And slowly, incrementally, Midnight began to move closer. Not directly toward her, but in a gradually tightening spiral that brought him nearer with each circuit. His nostrils flared constantly, drinking in her scent, trying to categorize her as threat or non-threat, prey or predator or something that didn't fit neatly into his understanding of the world. When he was perhaps 15 feet away, close enough that Lily could see the individual scars on his shoulders, could count the different shades of black in his coat, he stopped. They regarded each other across that small distance, girl and horse, both wounded, both wary, both desperately hoping for connection even as they feared it. "I lost my mother," Lily said quietly, the words emerging without conscious decision to speak them. "Cancer took her 2 years ago, and it broke something in me. I've been so angry and scared and lost ever since, pushing away everyone who tried to help because I didn't know how to accept help without falling apart completely. I think maybe you understand that feeling, the way caring about things just makes you vulnerable to more pain." Midnight's ears flicked forward and back, processing the sound of her voice if not the meaning of her words. His head lowered slightly, tension easing fractionally from his shoulders. Lily continued talking, letting words flow without editing or censoring, offering her own vulnerability in exchange for his proximity. "Everyone expects me to be over it by now, to have moved on and accepted what happened and gotten back to being a normal teenager. But I don't know how to be normal anymore. I don't know how to care about homework and social drama and all the things that used to seem important when there's this hole in my life where the most important person used to be. So I just go through the motions and try not to feel too much because feeling too much means remembering what I lost." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way Lily hadn't been honest with anyone, including herself, in months. Midnight took 2 steps closer, then one more, now near enough that if he struck out, there would be no time to react, no possibility of escape. Lily's heart hammered, but she didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat in the dirt offering her truth to a creature that couldn't judge it. "But sitting here with you," she continued, her voice barely audible, "being present with something that's hurting as much as I am, it makes me think maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to get over it or move past it. Maybe we're supposed to carry it with us and let it transform us into something different than we were before. Something scarred but stronger, broken but still standing." Midnight extended his neck, stretching toward her, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent more directly. Lily held perfectly still, barely breathing, watching as his muzzle came closer and closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. For a suspended moment, they existed in that space between touch and distance, connection hovering just out of reach. Then a truck backfired on the distant road, the sharp crack echoing across the fields like a gunshot, and Midnight exploded backward, all four hooves leaving the ground as he spun away from Lily and bolted to the far corner of the corral. The moment shattered, the fragile bridge between them collapsing before it could bear any weight. Lily released the breath she had been holding, disappointment sharp in her chest. They had been so close, mere inches from actual contact, from the kind of breakthrough that might have changed everything. But the world had intervened, had reminded both of them that trust was dangerous, that opening yourself up just meant you could be hurt more easily. From outside the fence, Tommy's voice carried worry and relief in equal measure. "You okay, Miss Lily? That was intense. I thought for sure he was going to touch you." "Me too," Lily said, her voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. She unfolded herself from the ground slowly, muscles protesting after. So long in one position, and stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body. But at least he didn't attack. That's something. She walked to the gate, moving slowly to avoid triggering another panic response from Midnight, and let herself out of the corral. Tommy was there immediately with water and concern, pressing the bottle into her hands and searching her face for signs of trauma or injury. "That was the bravest and stupidest thing I've ever seen," he said, and there was admiration in his voice along with the criticism. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Lily pointed out, drinking deeply from the water bottle, the liquid cool and perfect against her parched throat. "And he let me get closer than anyone else has gotten. Close enough to almost touch him. That's progress." "Progress toward what, though?" Tommy asked, and the question was genuine, not rhetorical. "What's the end goal here? What are you hoping to achieve?" Lily looked at Midnight, still pressed into the far corner of the corral, still trembling with adrenaline and fear. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't have some grand plan to turn him into a riding horse or sell him for profit or any of that. I just want to help him understand that not all humans are cruel, that sometimes people can be trusted, that vulnerability doesn't always lead to pain. And maybe in helping him learn that I can learn it too." The honesty of the statement seemed to strike Tommy speechless for a moment. He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read, something between concern and understanding and a kind of sad recognition. "You know people are talking, right? Around town, I mean. They're saying you've lost it, that the grief finally broke you, that David should intervene before you get yourself killed." "Let them talk," Lily said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "They've been talking about me since Mom died, whispering about how sad it is, how I'm not handling it well, how I need help I'm not getting. At least now they're talking about something I'm choosing to do rather than something that was done to me." Tommy nodded slowly, processing this. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're doing something most people wouldn't have the courage to do. Whether it works or not, at least you're trying. That's more than most folks can say." The words settled over Lily like a blanket, warm and comforting in their simple acceptance. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to validate her choice, to acknowledge that even if this whole endeavor failed spectacularly, the attempt itself had value. Tommy, with his earnest face and awkward kindness, had given her that gift without even realizing its significance. They stood together in companionable silence, watching Midnight gradually settle in his corner, the panic slowly draining from his posture. After a while, Tommy checked his watch and made noises about needing to get to his other jobs, the various odd tasks he performed around the county to cobble together a living. Lily thanked him for staying, for being her safety net, and he waved off her gratitude with characteristic awkwardness before climbing into his truck and rattling back down the driveway. Alone again, Lily returned to her milk crate and her sketchbook, trying to capture the intensity of that almost touch, the way Midnight's muzzle had extended toward her face, the suspended moment when connection had seemed not just possible but inevitable. Her hand moved across the page with more confidence than before, muscle memory taking over as she translated three-dimensional reality into two-dimensional representation. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Lily observed, drew, occasionally spoke to Midnight in a voice pitched to carry calm rather than specific meaning. Midnight paced, ate, drank, watched her with slightly less suspicion than before but still plenty of wariness. The sun made its arc across the sky, The temperature rose and fell, and gradually the small space of the corral became a world unto itself, containing everything that mattered. David emerged from the barn in the late afternoon, wiping his hands on a rag stained with grease and dirt. He approached the corral slowly, stopping beside Lily but not speaking immediately, just standing there observing his daughter and the horse she had claimed. When he finally did speak, his voice carried something that might have been approval or might have been resignation. "Tommy stopped by the barn earlier, told me what you did this morning. Said you sat in the corral with that beast for hours, got close enough to almost touch him." Lily nodded, not sure what response her father wanted or expected. David was silent for another long moment, then released a breath that sounded like it had been held for months. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he said finally. "Would have walked into that corral without hesitation. Would have believed with her whole heart that patience and love could heal anything. I always admired that about her, even when it terrified me. She never let fear stop her from reaching toward things that mattered." It was the most he had said about Margaret in one breath since the funeral, and Lily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I miss her," she said simply, the words inadequate but all she had. "I miss her too," David admitted, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. "Every day, every minute. The house feels empty without her. The farm feels pointless. Everything feels like I'm just going through motions waiting for life to make sense again. But watching you with that horse, seeing you reach toward something difficult and scary because you believe it's worth doing, that's the first thing that's felt like it might have meaning since we lost her." He put a hand on Lily's shoulder, a brief squeeze that conveyed more than words could, then walked back toward the house, leaving her alone with the weight of his confession and the realization that they had both been drowning separately when they might have saved each other by reaching out. As evening approached and the shadows lengthened, Lily made her decision. She opened the corral gate and stepped inside again, moving to the center of the space and sitting down in the same spot she had occupied that morning. Midnight, who had been grazing on the remnants of his hay, raised his head sharply, ears pinning back in automatic defensive response. "I know I'm pushing my luck," Lily said conversationally, as if they were old friends catching up rather than traumatized beings trying to find common ground. "But I think we were onto something this morning, before that truck scared you. I think we were close to something real, something that might actually help both of us. So I'm going to sit here again, and you can decide whether to come closer or stay away. Your choice, always your choice." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular colors that Lily would have photographed if she had a camera, would have painted if she had her mother's talent with colors. Instead, she committed it to memory, the particular quality of light that made midnight's coat shimmer like oil on water, the way the corral fence cast long shadows across the packed earth, the feeling of being present in a moment that might prove significant or might just be another evening among thousands. And midnight, perhaps sensing that the day was ending and night was coming, perhaps feeling the same pull toward connection that Lily felt, began to move. Not the tight, nervous circles of this morning, but a direct path toward where she sat, each step deliberate and chosen. Lily's breath caught in her throat, but she remained still, letting him come to her in his own time, at his own pace. When he was close enough that she could have reached out and touched him, he stopped. They regarded each other in the fading light, and Lily saw something shift in his eyes, a fractional softening of the defensive walls he had maintained so rigidly. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat and let the moment stretch between them, fragile and precious. Midnight lowered his head slowly until his muzzle was level with her face, and this time when he extended his neck, there was no truck backfire to interrupt. His breath was warm and sweet with hay, his eyes large and dark and full of questions neither of them could articulate. Lily felt the soft velvet of his muzzle brush against her cheek, the lightest possible contact, more suggestion than actual touch. "There you are," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now, hot and fast and somehow cleansing. "I see you. I see you and I'm not afraid." It wasn't true, of course. She was terrified, had been terrified all day, would probably be terrified tomorrow and every day after until fear became so familiar it lost its power. But in that moment, With midnight's breath on her face and the sunset painting the world in impossible colors, the terror didn't matter. What mattered was the connection. The bridge they had built between two wounded souls. The proof that even the most damaged things could reach toward each other and find something that felt like hope. Midnight pulled back after a moment, the contact broken, but his posture had changed completely. The aggressive vigilance had melted into something calmer, more curious. He didn't retreat to his corner but stood nearby, occasionally reaching down to lip at Lily's hair or shoulder in gentle exploration, learning her through touch and scent and proximity. The stars emerged one by one as full darkness fell, and Lily stood slowly, every muscle in her body protesting the movement after so many hours of sitting. Midnight didn't spook at her movement, just watched with ears pricked forward, alert but not alarmed. She walked to the gate and let herself out, latching it behind her with hands that shook from exhaustion and emotion. Tommy had left his water bottle on the fence post, and Lily drained it in several long swallows, only then realizing how dehydrated she had become. Her father's shadow appeared in the kitchen window, watching her, and she raised a hand in acknowledgement. He raised one back, a small gesture that somehow felt monumental, a recognition that they were both still here, still trying, still capable of seeing each other even through their grief. Lily walked to the house on legs that barely supported her weight, her body demanding rest even as her mind raced with everything that had happened, everything that might happen tomorrow. She ate the dinner her father had left for her, some kind of casserole that probably came from a neighbor's kitchen, tasting nothing but swallowing mechanically because her body needed fuel. When she finally climbed the stairs to her room, she found her sketchbook where she had left it that morning, filled now with studies of midnight that tracked the day's progression. The early drawings showed distance and distrust, but the later ones captured something different, a gradual softening, a movement toward connection. She added one final sketch before sleep, drawing from memory the moment when Midnight's muzzle had touched her cheek, trying to capture not just the physical contact but the emotional weight of it, the sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. As she drifted toward sleep, Lily thought about what Tommy had asked. What was the end goal? What did she hope to achieve? And she realized the answer was simpler than she had thought. She wasn't trying to break Midnight or tame him or turn him into something he wasn't. She was just trying to prove that trust was possible, that connection didn't always end in loss, that opening yourself to another being could lead to healing rather than more pain. And in proving it to him, maybe, just maybe, she could prove it to herself too. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.